Hi friends, it's Scott Jura again with another episode of Power Apps Cafe. In the last episode, we were looking at building a responsive Power App using the Creator Kit. And it was building an app similar to this that I showed at the recent Power Platform conference. So giving us the ability to have a grid and being able to filter and having sorting and being able to have responsive elements like this. In this episode, we're going to specifically focus in on the grid and how you can make it show different formatted columns, make it fold in to show on a phone as well as a tablet and on a full screen. So if you're interested in that, stick around. So the grid in this app uses the Creator Kit Fluent UI. And one of the great things about this is that it allows us to create like a responsive user interface and change the columns based on the available space. So I can, if I zoom, you can see here that we've got a very different experience on the phone compared to on the full size screen. And so one of the things about that is that we need to be able to not only show a dynamic width of the various different containers that we looked at in the previous video, we also need to look at the various different size breakpoints of our app and then respond to that and create different column formatting depending on what size it's being shown at. So when you install the Creator Kit, you get a reference application, and actually there's a reference application for both a model-driven and a canvas app. So this is the model-driven reference app that we're showing here. And I specifically selected the details list item in the left-hand nav here because it showcases all the different components. But this is specifically showing the details list component, and there's some guidance on when to use it. But there's also some examples on how to use it as well. And so you can do things like, okay, we've got different styles of selection. So this is single selection, and this is multi-select. And we've also got, we can alternate the rows, that we can also have the ability to have wrappable columns like this, or not wrappable. That you can see here, it's just going to truncate them using the ellipses. But also there's things like collapsing columns as well. So here what we're showing is the modified underneath the main text. So in the code, you can see all of the examples of how that actually works. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply that functionality into our app that we started building in the previous video, and we're going to create a grid of accounts. And in that grid, we're also going to not only show some information about the account, we're also going to show some custom indicators, specifically around the indicators of the status of that account. So you can see here, there's different ways we can show indicators. We can have icons or embed SVGs, but we can also put like text with different colors or a circle. We'll use that to format different columns, and also depending on the width of the width of the available screen will show different formatting of those tags. It's been really great to see the Creator Kit actually turning up in some of the recent COE starter kit, and you can see actually that this is using the details list here, and you can see that those status columns here, this is the same thing. It's using that kind of tag functionality. So if we head over to the app that we were working on previously, where we got to is we looked at how the various different containers give us a degree of responsive element in terms of the dynamic widths and dynamic heights, and being able to stack items on top of each other and side by side with various different padding. We've also got the elevation component giving us that nice bit of box shadow on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our container grid, and we're going to add in the Fluent details list here. And so you can see here, it's just popped it in. It's asking us which data source we want to connect it to. So we're just going to connect it to accounts because that's what we want to do. but you can see that it's not actually displaying anything yet. So first thing first is what we need to do is we want to go and position it so that it's actually going to be positioned inside this container and fill the available space. Now, one of the things about once you're inside a standard container, it doesn't have that same kind of dynamic width aspect that the parent container does. Now, we could certainly add a container in here, and to get that dynamic expansion of various of the components. So let's say if I go into my parent container root and I add in a stack here of a horizontal stack, or indeed if I just simply add in a details list to that. So I go to the details list here and I add that in. You can see here immediately that it's actually expanding the full width, which is great. You know, that's exactly kind of the thing we want to happen. However, one of the things that we want is this elevation to appear behind this component here. And so we've already got the elevation component in there. And in order to get the details list on top of the elevation, we have to wrap them both up inside a container so that we can put them on top of each other. So I'm going to remove that. And all we would simply do is to make this able to be expanded to the full width. We would make the height and the width to be the parent dot height, and the width would be parent dot width, like this. And then we make the X and the Y just 0 to make sure it's located at the top. So there we go. We've got our details list located at the top of that. But notice that it's actually now what's happened is that it's actually too wide, right? Because it's actually filling up the entire space. So what we want to do is make sure that it's padded using the same padding that the elevation is using. So what we'll do here is actually, rather than that, we'll put the X at 4U and Y at 4U, so it's located there. And then we'll subtract 8U to make sure we've got enough padding. So there's a little bit of manual positioning there, like we might have had to do previously. But at least what we've got here is we've got the ability to, we need to put that in there. It didn't quite work. I don't know what happened there. So 4 times U. There we go. It's positioned there. And widen the width and the height. Did I just set the wrong the wrong height and width of something? And make the height minus 8 times U, like that. So it's now positioned. So did I set the elevation to be that? I did. Let's just set that back to 0, and that, and the width. Remove that. There we go. So that should work better. So what we can see here is we've now got the elevation and the details list effectively stacked on top of each other. So they look like they're kind of the part of the same component. And then you can see you've got the scroll bar down the left-hand side here. So it's doing what it should do. So although most of the layout is being happened by the stack containers, as soon as you go into a standard container, you do have to do a little bit of manual laying out in terms of the aligning it. But what we want to try and do is minimize as much as possible. So only when we need to have things specifically positioned at X, Y's relative to a parent container do we need to do this. So in the grid, what we want to do is make sure that this is showing accounts, because at the moment it's not. So although we've bound it to the accounts, so the items property is showing the accounts, what we also need to do is we need to define the fields, okay, the fields that we're going to display. So what we're going to have is, we don't need the primary contact. We're going to account name, phone, city, let's put the description in there, and let's put the phone number, telephone. I think we've already got that. Is it called main phone? Yeah, we've already got that in the list. And we're also going to show something called the account status here. And so what this account status is, it's a lookup. So if we go over account table here, what we've got is just our accounts table, and then we've got another table which is called account statuses. And there is a many to one relationship between the account table and the account statuses table. And what this means is that it allows us to have some additional metadata, if you like, about that account status. So in our case, we've obviously got the name, but we also want to display some additional information like the color to use for that particular account status. And so we're going to use that in the user interface. Now, of course, you could use a choice column here. That would also work, but then you would need to store that metadata in another table anyway. There are some advantages to using choices. So choices can be translated into multiple languages. There are some disadvantages to choices because there is some limited ability to sort, for example, on choices. So the choice column or the account status, it's going to be very similar in the overall effect here. And in fact, as we progress through here, I'm going to show you how you would use both choice and lookup filters. And we're going to do filtering on both of those different column types. So we will, if we look at the edit data on the account statuses, we're going to be using things like the background color and the icon name and the text color, which is an additional column here. And we're going to pull that in order to dynamically color the different status indicators. So once I've picked up all of the fields I need, what I also need to do is go and define the column layout. So if I go into columns here, there is just an empty. Now I need to specify a set of records here. And the great way of doing that is you can actually specify create an in-memory set of records using the table function. So I'm going to now construct a set of table layouts. I'm just going to paste something in here. And what that means, I'll show you what that is it's got a number of different properties here. So the first one is the name of the actual column that I'm going to be displaying. So this is like the logical name. Okay, so that's the name that it's stored inside Dataverse. And then we've got the display name, which is in our case going to be account name. So you can then customize this depending on the how you want to have the user interface. You could also dynamically load this based on some of the metadata of that column, because you can pick up metadata dynamically from Dataverse. And then we've got lots of other different properties. So like whether or not we want to show the text in bold. We're going to show this as a row header column, which means it stands out as a more significant cell and is announced in a more significant way by screen readers. We're also going to say we'll hide when blank is true. So if there's no values there, it doesn't display anything. In this particular case, obviously that's not going to have much in effect because we've always got an account name. But for an account status, for example, if it was blank, we wouldn't want to show an empty box. We just want to show nothing there. We can also have additional properties like a padding to give spacing inside a cell and how we want to center it. So all of these are kind of like formatting. These are formatting type properties. And then we've got additional things. So like, okay, whether or not it's going to wrap, which is multi-line, the property. And then we've got to say, well, okay, is it sortable and is it resizable? These are, again, things that affect the user interface. But one of the things that we also want to have here is the width. And this width here is going to be dynamic based on the size of the screen. So remember before we defined the breakpoints of our app. So if we go back to our app here and we look at the app properties in advanced, what we've got is we've got a set of breakpoints. And so this is saying that there is small, medium, and large sizes. And so anything that's 600 pixels or less is defined as small, and then you've got medium as 900 less, etc. And those then are used dynamically for each screen. That gives us a set of, if we go into our columns again, definition, it gives us this special size. Here we go, size property. So we can say if the active screen is small, then we provide a different width. So if it's small, we're just going to simply provide the width of the entire container. But if it is anything other than the small, we're actually going to create this as a much more responsive size. So we're going to actually provide additional sizes for additional columns. Now, the details list doesn't automatically manage responsivity. You actually have to perform this as a calculation. So in this case, what we're saying is we're saying we're going to have another column which is 100 pixels, and another one which is 200 pixels, and then there's a 16 pixel spacing between them, and then another 200 column pixels. And then we also want to provide some space for the selection radio buttons on the left hand side, and the padding of the overall grid, and also the last piece, which is like some space for the scroll bar if it needs a scroll bar. So you need to be able to put that in there just to accommodate those additional aspects. And so you can immediately see that you've got this account. So we run this, we've got account name. And so we can see here that it's resizable, and there's some additional space that's being left for those other columns. And I can scroll up and down here, and you can see it's actually very quick, even though there's a lot of records in here. I think there's multiple thousands of records. And I have got a sortable icon here, so it will automatically manage my sorting for me, providing I am connecting directly to a Dataverse table. It will manage that sorting for me. Now, if I go into this the details list, and I go to items, and I say do something like, I don't know, I add columns, I add something like this. What I've done there is I've just changed that account's direct binding to the accounts Dataverse table. And it's no longer directly going to the database. It's now sort of loading that into effectively a local collection, and then it's adding on a column. So what that does is that actually breaks the link directly to Dataverse. You can see here it can no longer dynamically sort this column. What it also means is it also breaks some of the delegatability that this detailed list will be able to do, because no longer has it got that direct connection to the Dataverse table. It's only going to be looking at the collection. And what I mean by that is that collection is going to be subject to all of the delegation limits that you get with an in-memory collection, and i.e. you're only going to be able to download a set number of records, and you would have to sort of filter it to a small number of records to display, rather than if I go back here and go to my items and remove this and go to accounts, what this will do now is it will now be able to sort across the entire data set, even if there's multiple thousands of records. And we can see this in action, because if we go into the monitor and open the monitor, what this gives us the ability to do is sort of peek into the network calls that the Power App is performing. And this is very, very important, because whilst you're developing your application, you want to be able to make sure that any queries that you're doing don't happen on the client, they happen on the server, unless they're very, very small data sets that you're going to be filtering over. And so what do I mean by that? So if you imagine we've got our client here, and we've got our server, and then we've got a Dataverse set of accounts, which is like 50,000 records. What will happen is if I do a query that is non-delegatable, there is something called the delegation limit. And that delegation limit will basically mean that when it downloads the records into memory, it will only get up to that delegation limit. So if I'm going to be filtering these records, and I want to filter out so that I want to this first record and also this second record, so that's my filter happens. What will happen is, because I've only got the first 200 records, I'm not going to get that second record that I need to be able to filter. So any filtering I apply is only going to apply to that first 200 records. So it's going to be incorrect. So what we want to be able to do is, when we get the records, we want to, rather than download up to that delegation limit and then perform the filter, we want to be able to pass that filter across to the server. So the filter is happening on the server rather than the client. And so because it happens on the server, we only get those 2 records returned. We don't get the full set of records, the 200 records, and then we do the filter. And of course, that's going to give us the correct set of results. So we can see that in action if we go into our app here and we go and run it. So I'm going to run this and I perform a sort. Let's just, sort by account name and then go over to the monitor. So we've now got a category, a network category operation, and the operation is get rows, which is good. So if we look at the request here, the request that it's doing is going to include, we are requesting the accounts here, and we're actually sending an order by here by name ascending. And that means that that order by is always going to go across to the server, and it's going to be performed on the server. And if we did any filtering, we'd also want that filtering to be passed across here. If we were to do any filtering that would happen on the client, what we would see is after this network call, we'd also see a second call, which would be a filter or a sort. And so let's actually see what that looks like. I'm just going to clear that dashboard there and go back over to our app here. And let's go and convert this into a collection like we did before. So let's go add columns like that and say foo bar. So that is now a collection. And let's go and do a filter on that. So let's say where let's filter on the industry like this. So industry, where it's going to be industry. This is an industry is actually a choice column. And I'm going to say, get me all the records where they are consulting like this. Okay. So that would be the sort of like the first, that would be where I'm filtering my records in that example where I had a yellow and a blue record to get. So I'm going to now go back and clear my monitor, which I keep losing it. Where is it gone? There it is. But it's right next to it. And let's clear that there. And let's just go and refresh this like that. And go back to our monitor. What you can see here is we've got a call to get rows. And if we look at the request that it's being called here, it's actually going and getting all of it's trying to get all of the accounts. But in actual fact, what will happen here is that you'll actually only get a set number of records because there is like a maximum number of the delegation maximum. So if you look at the response here, there's like a max page size there. So you're only ever going to get a certain number of records, and which means that when it performs the filter, which is the second one, you're actually filtering on a very limited set of records, which means you may not actually get the records that you're interested in. So if we now go back to the example we had here and remove the add column, so we're actually now going to be getting it directly from the accounts table. So it's like a direct binding. There we go, like that. And remove that, that's good. And so now if we go back to here and we just clear this data and we do a refresh on our accounts and go back into our monitor here. So you can now see that there's a call to get rows, but there is no subsequent filter. And if we look at the request, what we've now got is a filter that's actually happening inside our query. So that filter and also the order by is being passed across to the server. And this is super, super, super important. So let's close the monitor and go back to here. Let's change the item. Well, actually, let's just leave those in there. Actually, let's leave that filter. We've now got the ability to sort by our various different records here. And we can start to add additional columns. And the great thing is that all the sorting is now handled internally inside this component. And actually that becomes quite that's quite good, because there are some column types such as choices, so that choice that we were just filtering on industries, you currently you can't sort by. So you can't sort by choice columns in a delegated way. You'd have to download them and then sort them, which is a bit awkward. But because we're using the details list, it actually enables us to sort because it's doing it internally. So I'm going to go and add in now the rest of these columns. Okay, so here we've got our, at the moment we've just got our single account name, and we're just going to add some more columns here. So let's go through each of these. So the description column is fairly straightforward, because it's just showing multiple lines of text. But there is something special about this, because if we look at this property here, what we're saying is that we're going to show this as the subtext of the name column. So it's the details list gives us the ability to sort of show information underneath other column data. And what we can do is then also give the ability to say it's, in this case, we're going to show it on row 3. So if we wanted to show multiple bits of data, we can then configure where the rows are. Now, some of those rows may or may not be there. So if we don't have anything on row 2 and row 1, it won't show a space. It's just going to collapse up, and it's going to shrink to use the available space. And so the next one down, the telephone column. Okay, so that is very, very similar. However, it's now got a condition on show subtext of. So what we've got here is we've got only show it as a subtext of name if the size, the app size, is small. So remember before, the size of the name column was dependent on small, so it would fill out the entire width of the grid if it was small. But if it was anything other than small, it was providing space for additional columns. And that's because when it's in the small form factor, we are folding all of these other different columns underneath the name. So the next one down is exactly the same, and the account status is also the same. It will also show as the subtext. You can see here it's doing the same thing, but it's got some additional properties here. And so we've got this cell type indicator tag. So what it's doing is it's defining that this particular column is showing as not just standard text, it's showing it as an indicator. And we've got some additional columns here which define the text that indicator is going to be used. And there's two types of indicators. There's like just a standard tag, which is like a box. And then there's an indicator tag, which shows like a little circle, which has got a color. And so how do we get these columns here? So you notice these are kind of logical names of columns. So because what we could do is we could use add columns to add these in to go and grab the status colors from the account status lookup column. But the problem is if we did that, if we added in that data using add column, that's going to suddenly remove the ability to have us that direct binding to Dataverse. So rather than using add columns, what we've got is a subtly different way of doing that. So we've actually added in some custom fields here, which is account status color and account status text on the account table. And these are simply using, if we go to this particular one here, it's using the new formula data type. And it's going and grabbing the background color of the related status lookup. So it's just a piece of Power Effects that goes and grabs it, and it's just being surfaced as a column. You could do the same as a standard with just as a calculated field as well, but it allows us now to, if we if we run this, you can see at the moment we've just got these status tags here. They are, let's just sort them by so you can see these status, they're all gray, which is not that great. But if we go and add in to our fields here, because at the moment we've only got these fields added in, we need to make sure that we add in the color fields. There we go, account status and text color. If we add those and now run this, and sort by status, you can see now we've got them looking nice and colored. So it does give us that ability to maintain the binding to Dataverse, keeping with the delegation, but also kind of getting some additional metadata to be used in the coloring of this. I will show in a later video how we can use add columns and still maintain delegatable expressions, but in this one I wanted to stick with the standard functionality of the details list so that we can make use of the built-in sorting. So now if we dynamically make the size increase here, it's obviously quite large. I'm just using zoom on here. You could equally use the F12 emulator. You can see here that the columns have folded underneath each other so that we are showing them as subtext of the main name. And so that enables us to actually give a much more compact view of all of our records, so that if I'm using a mobile phone, it's going to be much easier to display all of my data. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. We've covered quite a bit there, the configuration. So if you head over to the Creator Kit documentation, so aka.ms/Creator Kit, you can see all of the information and how to configure the details list. Obviously also look at the reference app, because you can go and grab the properties there. So it lists all the different ways of configuring it. But what I've shown here is a very effective way of quickly getting up and running with a very native looking experience for your apps. So in the next one, we're going to further explore this and look at how to add in filtering while still maintaining some delegation. So until that next time, I hope you've had a great rest of your day. Cheers.